We're going to begin our panel now. DeFi is a massive social good. The name of this panel reflects the difference that DeFi has made to people and the benefits to the underprivileged and a lot of people who have had serious problems with a normal banking system. People who are perhaps disadvantaged in other areas have had their lives changed and benefited by use of DeFi. Plus, all of the charitable ways that DeFi can contribute, to different parts of communities. Not to mention, the major mission of DeFiCon, which is, education and benefit, being the only charitable and non-profit conference in the world. Everyone here has that mission to, improve the world around them, and also, be a force to change some of the narrative around crypto and DeFi, so people can open their eyes to, how it is making the world a better place. My name is Edward Fricker. I am an attorney and a privacy activist and representing founders of DeFi protocols, investors, and people, are trying to improve the world with privacy and permissionless systems. So without further ado, let me introduce the panel, and then they can go and introduce themselves. First up, we have Marcus Aurelius, who's a core contributor of Klima DAO. We have Zoe Weinberg, also known as International Woman of Mystery, the founder of Ante. And we have Robbie Heeger, who's president and CEO of Endaoment. And Anna Stone, the co-founder of GoodDollar. So let's get some self-introductions. Marcus, if you want to take the stage now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marcus. I'm a core contributor at Klima DAO. I've been mostly working on our data and metrics team. I also do some policy work. My background is in data science and software engineering. I'm really excited about the opportunity that blockchain presents to scale up climate action through mechanisms like the voluntary carbon market. Basically, at Klima DAO, the vision we have is that everyone anywhere on the planet should be able to make a living by taking climate positive action. And anyone should be able to support those climate positive actions through a public and transparent market. So I think that's a pretty good summary.
Hi, everyone. I'm Zoe Weinberg. I'm the founder of ante. We seek to advance technology that counters digital authoritarianism, so things like censorship, surveillance, and disinformation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Robbie Heeger. I am the president and CEO of Endaoment. We are a 501c3 nonprofit community foundation serving the crypto community. We specialize in processing gifts of any digital asset. And to date, have processed nearly $50 million in charitable donations across a variety of different tokens, NFTs, you name it, we take it. And it's just really a pleasure to be here and to be supporting this nonprofit conference as well.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Stone. I'm one of the co-founders and core contributors to the GoodDollar protocol. In DAO, GoodDollar is a reserve-backed universal basic income cryptocurrency that is designed to actually enable any single person, no matter where you are in the world, to be able to easily sign up into a DeFi non-custodial wallet and start to claim real free crypto every day for free. As of today, we're the world's largest UBI community with nearly 500,000 members who hold GoodDollar in over 181 countries around the world. And we've distributed nearly $250,000 as UBI to people who are now using this UBI, hacking value into it to really improve their lives. And so I think this is what our industry should be doing more of, and so it's a pleasure that, to be here, and thanks for having us.
Great, and that brings us on to a really, really great sort of topic of conversation. Access to finance, access to banking, privacy, these are all human rights as ratified by the United Nations member states. We all sort of intrinsically believe in these, but there's also this narrative that these freedom-enhancing technologies like DeFi and crypto, they're either used by shady characters, or they're bad for the environment, or climate damage. Like, I'd like an opinion from you guys. How do you respond when people come to you with this kind of narrative?
Yeah, so I guess I'll latch on to the environmental impact aspect of this question because that's sort of my wheelhouse and one of the problem that I'm really focused on right now. So I think there's this sentiment that any source of emissions must be bad. And the reality is that there are sources of emissions that are comparable to the entire blockchain industry that we take to be extremely valuable in society. An example that's sort of cheeky is tumble dryers consume about the same amount of energy as the entire crypto ecosystem, and I think we would all be hesitant to give up our tumble dryers, even though it's a sort of marginal value add. So there's sort of that aspect where, if the amount of value delivered by a source of emissions exceeds the cost to society of the emissions that it emits, then obviously we need to do that thing to get the value difference. So the question is, on one hand, how do we reduce the impact, if possible, and turn crypto into a tool, not just for managing traditional financial transactions, but also funding the climate action that we need to reverse or mitigate the impact of climate change. And I think that's what we're trying to do at Klima DAO. And I think there's also this sense that proof of work is inherently a problem. There's some really exciting opportunities to actually use proof of work in the green transition to do things like offload excess energy from renewables that would otherwise be thrown away and use that to generate economic value. So yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity to turn around this narrative that blockchain is a problem for the environment and show the opportunities that blockchain presents, especially public blockchains, for incentivizing climate action and fighting climate change.
Yeah, we've even seen, hydroelectric and renewable energy projects sponsored by mining companies. They pay in advance for the electricity rights, and these make some of these renewable energy projects actually sustainably able to be founded, right? So you have dams and solar projects that are and geothermal projects that wouldn't exist if it weren't for crypto mining, right?
Absolutely.
So in a former life, I worked as an emergency aid worker in northern Iraq. Edward, I think you know this story. And while I was living in Iraq, I got to know the first Bitcoin miners in Iraq. And they'd set up a little Bitcoin mining operation in a tiny little village, nondescript white building. You go to the basement. And, I think at the time, at first, I thought it was a little bit odd. These guys are living pretty proximate to a very active war zone. ISIS is like mere miles away, and yet, they're mining Bitcoin. But I think as I spent more time with them, it was extremely formative, an extremely formative experience because it really sort of clicked for me that everybody involved in that operation at one point or another had been displaced or had been a refugee. The Iraqi dinar is not a historically reliable currency. It's almost impossible for them to, participate in the global banking system. And now, for the first time, essentially in history, they could walk out of Iraq tomorrow and have assets and have a certain amount of financial security and freedom that was critical and meaningful in a way that I think lots of us, take for granted all the time. So I think for me, that was a real light bulb moment of realizing, okay, there's real potential here for this to be really game-changing especially for populations that are very marginalized or otherwise don't have access to financial services.
So you were seeing people in Iraq, like refugees, that were essentially being saved by the fact that they were mining or using crypto.
Yeah, or I would say, I think, innovation, some of the best innovation often comes about as a result of need and being resourceful. And I think when you're living in a pretty challenging environment in which, you've faced different sorts of financial collapse and collapse of security, et cetera, you're willing to be a little bit more experimental and forward-thinking than you might otherwise be.
Very cool.
Yeah, I just want to begin today by saying that code is speech and that it's critical that we work together to organize to protect digital privacy, that a lot of the social good that DeFi has produced has been through the universal unbiased access, as Zoe was just walking us through, of financial services to anybody with an internet connection, regardless of who they are and regardless of what any particular centralized actor thinks of them. And So in that way, I think we're at Endaoment really building infrastructure to be able to sort of operationalize the current event cycle towards direct action. We've seen over $500,000 raised for abortion rights, $3 million plus raised for Ukrainian humanitarian aid, nearly $1 million for the AAPI community to support, safety programs as a wave of Asian hate has spread across our country. There are just countless efforts out there to leverage the wealth created in crypto and to put it into the hands of organizations that are doing active work to provide protection and possibility to marginalized groups.
Yeah, there you go. And like using DeFi protocols for transparency, right? Whenever you donate to a charity, everyone sort of has this feeling inside, I want to make a difference, but, can I see that these funds are actually reaching the right place? How do I know that it's being protected? How do I know that, the staff of the charity, one of them might not go rogue, right? DeFi protocols are essentially built to give protections to these people that are donating and assurances, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Every single one of the nonprofits that have received money on Endaoment have a paper trail that's publicly available on chain about where that money came from, how it came in, while protecting the anonymity of the donor themselves. And I think just putting the philanthropic activity of the world on chain increases the transparency and overarching accessibility of the work that's happening in the philanthropic sector. But beyond that, we see opportunities to leverage decentralized software and services to improve the overarching financial management of the philanthropic sector as well. In the audience today, we have Chauncey St. John from Angel Protocol, who is an intrepid entrepreneur himself, bringing perpetual endowments to the table for nonprofits to be able to leverage yield-bearing markets across the crypto space in order to use this new technology to better manage their own finances. And that's something that we're really inspired by at Endaoment. And when we speak with nonprofits, they're coming from a space where they're using paper checks to process their donations. And the concept of us being able to take stable coins, immediately destroy them, turn them into a wire payment all programmatically and deliver a donation on the same day is revolutionary, let alone the opportunity to earn yield from different DeFi protocols. So as we advance Endaoment, what we see is an opportunity to sort of offer nonprofits and this industry in general an opportunity to leapfrog the wire payment stage and just move straight into self-custodial wallets, which I think is actually a great transition to what Anna's working on at the individual level as well.
Okay.
I think just to play devil's advocate for a minute, we've talked about, you mentioned the narrative that's been created around DeFi regarding its potential for impact versus what we've actually delivered. And I think, we're at a place in the industry where now we're actually starting to see real proof points of the potential for decentralized finance infrastructure in the world, right? So I think a great example is actually crowdfunding and raising money. Crypto, DeFi has proven to be a superior technology than other forces of funding in times of crisis and crowdfunding for emergencies. Just look at what happened with Ukraine, right? Over the past few months, it was a proven improvement upon existing systems. Klima DAO and projects like GoodDollar show that tokenomics and innovative tokenomics can actually be used to create market incentivized solutions for retails and corporates to solve entrenched endemic problems like poverty, like incentivizing action to climate, etc. right? So, however, if we're really real, I can tell you that every single builder on this stage will agree with me that 99% of the industry, the builders, the investors, are not thinking about impact. They're not thinking about how do we deploy this incredible wealth infrastructure that we've generated and created and actually deploy it towards solving real problems. And I think the challenge is that how can we, as a community of builders in this room, actually recognize that we have real examples of DeFi proving out why it's revolutionary, why it's amazing, why it's possible. But if we're not serious about changing how we talk about what we do, we are going to continue to get a bad rep, right? Using phrasing like going to wrecked doesn't make people feel confident that DeFi is useful for people at the lower ends of the pyramid and for financial inclusion, right? Aping in doesn't make anyone feel confident that DeFi is a baseline for sustainable wealth creation and investing, right? So I think we as an industry need to recognize that we're no longer in the area of potential, right? 2011, 2012, it was all about the narrative, the potential, what could potentially be done. We've made a lot of progress. We've built a lot of tech. We've built a lot of dApps, and we've proven out a lot of models that, yes, crypto can be used to solve for climate, inequality, access, more transparent fundraising. The use cases are here. What's not here is actually the rest of the industry in terms of rallying behind what we're building and providing more funding and talking about this is the critical thing of why DeFi matters and why it's important.
Yeah, and that is a critical point. We have to create our own narrative, right? There are so many profit-minded people that can see there's a lot of enthusiasm in getting into DeFi for rapid token bonuses, for high APYs. This kind of news travels fast. It's easy to move that around. But how do you rally support behind something like, hey, let's make the world a better place? How are you getting people to hear your message? How are you gathering your supporters? Practically, what sort of steps are you taking?
Yeah, and I think with climate action in particular, there's a very real sense in which we all want clean air, we all want clean water, we all want a habitable planet, but it's a classic tragedy of the commons is sort of the a traditional way of approaching this, but when we call it a tragedy, the reality is that we have solved this problem of the commons historically through a variety of mechanisms. Typically, top-down government action by states has been the one we've been using for the last couple hundred years. And the big question is, can climate change be approached in that manner? I'm a little skeptical about the ability of political solutions from the top down to solve this kind of global problem. And I'm optimistic that market-based solutions do have a role to play. The big question is, as you're getting at, is how do you rally support? How do you create that social consensus that we all should be putting X% of our wealth toward climate action every year? And for us, the sort of two concrete strategies that we've taken is one to create greater transparency and access to the existing carbon markets, in the hopes that we can create a more robust and scalable market. Because ultimately, there's a lot of promise in carbon markets, but the promise requires, to deliver on that promise requires scaling up the market dramatically, like 100x over the next 10 years or so. And on the TradFi rails that the market is currently operating on with like PDF documents and Excel spreadsheets, driving most of the activity, it's pretty clear that that technology is not going to scale. So we've been using a couple of techniques to sort of get the message out. We ran a love letters campaign, which is this idea that you retire some on-chain carbon and you publish a love letter in your retirement message about why you care about the planet, why you want to put your money where your mouth is, and instead of just talking about climate action, you want to support projects on the ground actually taking that action. The other big project we're running is called Klima Infinity, which is our partnerships program. We're working with Web3 projects, Web2 corporates, and really any kind of organization to implement a climate positive strategy, usually focused around calculating the emissions associated with that organization's activities, and then consuming on-chain offsets, as well as allocating funding to the support projects that support the development, that are developing this important space. So if you're interested, if you have an organization and you want to get involved with Klima Infinity, let me know. I'll be around. Yeah, those are the two of the main strategies we're using.
I think storytelling is an important part of this, but not just sort of talking about hypothetical use cases, but actually pointing to true, concrete, demonstrated examples is often helpful for people and compelling. And I think personally, I'm interested in issues around free speech and censorship and things like that. And I think I'm excited about the potential for both decentralization and distributed systems to help sort of advance individual rights and accountability and democratic values and things like that. And I look at examples like ways in which decentralized storage, say like an Arweave or IPFS, have been used by protesters in Hong Kong to upload copies of publications and media before it can be censored by Beijing, or the ways in which those tools have been used to create a mirror of, say, Wikipedia, so that even when access to those websites are, shut down by authorities, people are still able to access the content via other ways. I think those are the types of things that are, inspiring to me. I think as we look ahead to, people who are building in the metaverse and so forth, the sort of borderless potential there, I think, is really big. And if anybody wants some inspiration, I would recommend taking a look at something called the Uncensored Library, which was a library that was sponsored by Reporters Without Borders and created within Minecraft, and it houses documents that are censored by lots of different governments all over the world.
It's very cool, by the way.
Super cool. Everyone should check it out. And my understanding is that, if you're in Saudi Arabia and you want to learn more about Jamal Khashoggi, one of the key ways you can do it is, go into Minecraft, visit the Uncensored Library, and then you can actually read, materials about that topic. And it's very difficult for a government to selectively censor within a game. They would just have to sort of ban access to the game outright. And I believe the only country that's done that so far is, for Minecraft at least, is China. So, I think things like that can, kind of get your wheels turning about what are the other ways in which this technology can be leveraged for social good.
Yeah, I think the proof is in the pudding. We have to do the work as builders to take the concepts, take the principles that are working in the broader market for profit generation and apply them for impact generation. Right? It is so critical that we find a way to map the financial primitives that exist in the traditional finance world that are specifically geared towards impact, whether that's green banks, donor-advised funds, universal basic income, you name it, perpetual endowments, you name it, right? We need to map them into crypto protocols in order to be able to demonstrate and to start driving wealth generation for causes that generate impact. And so in that respect, it's really important from my perspective for us never to compromise on the amount of technology or sort of the application of the crypto primitives into these impact-focused projects. And I think what you have on the stage here is a cross-section of projects that have done a really wonderful job of prioritizing the technological baseline first, where we're using the token economic standards, where we're using the core protocols that are generating all of this interest and activity, to then repurpose it for an impact-focused outcome. And so my feeling here is that there are plenty of people who are coming from the opposite perspective, which is how do we take the Web 2 business model or the Web 2 tool set and incorporate the asset type into, the old impact model. Got to go the other way around. Got to start with translating the financial primitive, whatever sort of account type that is, into a smart contract powered environment that is overseen by token-based democracies or hierarchical democracies, and that leverages incentivization paradigms that are new to crypto, so that people who are making money in this space say, oh, look, I can use these same tools to generate impact as well. rather than saying, oh, I got to take this new wealth, move it back out into traditional finance, and then generate my impact. That's the wrong way to go about it. We've got to start by translating all of these primitives that exist, all these impact primitives that exist in the traditional finance world over to the crypto world, so that the people who that's their table stakes for participating in a protocol is this crypto native? Is this decentralization first? Is this a group of people who understand what's exciting to me about crypto, and now they're layering on the impact at the sort of like last mile of the action of the protocol? And so I think we're all really phenomenal examples of that, and I encourage anybody who's building in that space to prioritize those, crypto native principles first.
What Robbie said 1,000%, and I'm going to use that as a launch pad to talk about how we've deployed DeFi primitives and then what that actually means in terms of on the ground in action, right? So, I mean, GoodDollar is free crypto. That's what it is. The question is, how do you create free crypto that's actually useful for people that are financially underserved? It needs to be relatively stable enough to use as a medium of exchange. It needs to be liquid, and it needs to be liquid no matter what else is happening in the market. And generated sustainably. What are the two DeFi primitives that we used in order to create such a currency? Automated market maker. If you have an automated market maker, you have a reserve-backed currency that's liquid no matter what the market cap is. So it can be small, it can be circulating, people can buy, sell back into the contract. It balances, it's liquid at any price. What's now the question of sustainability? How do you fund that automated market maker? Well, guess what? In DeFi, we have a lot of money coming from a lot of different sources. So you can actually tap into fees, yield-generating protocols. We wrap Compound and Aave to generate yield. Stakers stake into those contracts. They generate yield. They go into the AMM that backs the UBI currency, right? And that creates an incentive circle where people make money in GoodDollars for staking into the protocol while also generating UBI, right? That's freely distributed every day. What is the impact of this on the ground? Because there is real free reserve-backed money being generated and distributed at scale every day. Well, I'll tell you examples of two of the change makers out there in the world and how they're using their GoodDollars. The first one is a member of our community named Steve in Nigeria, right? And so Steve is someone who originally joined as a claimer, claiming GoodDollars every single day. And then he realized, wow, this is real crypto that I can actually use to crowdfund for good causes, right? So Steve has actually started to crowdfund for different charities in Nigeria using GoodDollar to essentially disrupt the beneficiary donor model. This is someone who started as a recipient and now has transformed into a crypto UBI leader within his village in Nigeria, and probably alone is responsible for onboarding 50,000 people, okay, into decentralized finance. That's an incredible impact story that's only possible because of DeFi. Another example are people who are using this open free money system to actually start businesses, right? So if you have a liquid token, if it's interoperable, you can begin to use it as capital, startup capital. So not only can you say start a micro business where you act as you can basically cash out for GoodDollars, for cell phone minutes, which is a very typical form of mobile money throughout West Africa, right? This is someone who's doing this in Ghana. So you actually start a business that adds utility to the UBI ecosystem while enabling all of the people around you to use their GoodDollars for things they really need, right? And these are examples that, again, it fully disrupts the paradigm of who's a donor and who's a beneficiary, and represents the empowerment layer that we get with Web3, because what we're doing is we're creating open systems, open infrastructure, based off of inherently decentralized primitives that anyone can access and tap into and use, but we're deploying them to solve problems that are impact first. which is how do you get people into non-custodial wallets? How do you get them with real crypto in it? How do we make that crypto work in a way that people are able to use it and they're not afraid of a token crash and being the guy who spent 10,000 Bitcoins on pizza?
Yeah, and that's really, really strong points there. The entire reason, so a lot of community currencies have been made in the past, before Bitcoin. And this is always made by communities that they felt that their currency that they were forced to use or they were already using wasn't creating the social impact they wanted in their own community. They were seeing inequality of wealth build up. So local communities, in the 80s, 90s, they created local monies that they could use between each other just to make sure that what goes around comes around, right? And, Bitcoin was an evolution of that, and so has, many other currencies. But now that we do have, transparently fair currencies, whether they be used for community purposes or, universal basic income systems, they are transparently fair, and this helps people to create like a social good. This brought me on to something that Robbie was talking about. Growing now, when people are sort of creating investment portfolios or investing in funds, they want to know that they want to have some kind of participation. They want to have some kind of say in what the fund is investing in, even if it is like a pension fund. For example, they might not want it to be investing in gambling or tobacco companies, or not investing in arms dealers, or environmentally damaging companies. The movement for normal people to have a say in what the fund managers are investing in is growing. And then we have like participatory systems that DeFi has allowed that lets people vote or veto certain investments that their investment DAO is responsible for. And I don't, if any of you have experience with that, this will be like sort of a final note before we pass to the audience.
Yeah, I wouldn't characterize Klima DAO as an investment DAO, but we do have a decentralized token-based governance system, and it's a very important part of how we operate the protocol. I wanted to touch a little bit on your point about local currencies and sort of what are our currencies today backed with, and what do we maybe think they should be backed with. Sort of the US dollar has achieved a lot of its dominance in the world through the petrodollar system. Basically, if you want to buy and sell fossil fuels, you need to price them in dollars, or the US government will come knocking at your door, at least until recently. This is changing a little bit with Russia now attempting to price oil in rubles. So interesting developments there, but the point I wanted to make is that there is a fundamentally extractive role of the dollar in the global economy, and it derives a lot of its value from its role in this extractive economy. And I think there's an opportunity here with DeFi and the emerging refi, regenerative finance space, to think about what we think, where does value come from, right? So in my view, if we don't have a habitable planet, a lot of the great work that all of us are talking about and that our economy represents is undermined by like a fight for survival. And I think we want to avoid that. So at Klima, like the reason that we chose to back the Klima token with carbon offsets and eventually other ecosystem service assets is we think that our money should be representative of the positive action that we want to take in the world, that the currencies we develop and the projects that we support should have a fundamentally regenerative role in the world, adding value back into our ecosystems rather than extracting out of it. And yeah, so there's an opportunity to have our currencies represent the action we want to see in the world rather than representing the destruction of the things that enable life in the first place.
100%.
You brought up the issue of voting and the ways in which people can express their values through, directing how assets are allocated and so forth. And I think one of the challenges that we've seen in traditional finance is that even as shareholders of public companies, there has been so much intermediation between the end shareholder and the board of directors of a publicly traded company that even though theoretically I have a vote, my 401k is, in so many different complicated funds. I have no idea how those shares are being voted. And I think in many ways, one of the issues that we're solving for in this space is reducing that obviously that intermediation, but also sort of giving individuals a little bit more awareness and control of the ways in which they can express those values. And I think that there are innovations that are also happening on the shareholder activism space in TradFi that could either complement or could be used as sort of a counterpoint in DeFi as well. And so I would love to see like more interaction between those communities.
Yeah, we're seeing DAOs approach their decision making in surprisingly more transparent ways all the time, and a lot of like new sub-organizations coming out. I think there's a balance to be struck between hierarchical leadership and sort of like professional maintenance of a protocol and community-powered governance. And we're definitely in the experimentation phase right now of like what's the right amount of hierarchical organization versus like everybody vote. Controversial grant making all the time where somebody wants to give to a 501c3 that's like maybe a little bit iffy on the ethical spectrum. And we by our bylaws kick that to the board, but like the opportunities to then have signal-based voting or different times that we want to see. And so from And that's true for this conference as well, I will add. There is a community fund for this conference that you can donate to. There are QR codes. I've seen them all over the place. And the organizers of DeFiCon have been, selecting local nonprofits. And, like everybody's input here matters in how those nonprofits get selected. And I think like there are all sorts of new opportunities to try and engage with communities, whether that's through asset allocation or through just vote participation. And it's important that we stay curious and really experiment with what's possible here and try and use it as an opportunity to explain to people who aren't from the crypto space how crypto can sort of democratize or engender more participation in the broader institutional space, increasing overall trust of these institutions and, allowing for people to have their voice be heard in new and more meaningful ways.
Yeah, I'd agree with Robbie that as a builder, it's a real, ongoing, very present challenge of how do you actually continue to build and make progress while also continuing to disperse the decision-making power? The impact DAOs that you now see emerging in this regenerative finance space are, really dealing with that challenge on a day-to-day basis. How do you create a fair governance system that is designed to actually empower the widest cross-section of members, which is really, a different approach to growth and governance than most DeFi early governance models, and certainly what we see in traditional corporates, right? So it's really the new frontier, and it's not simple and it's not fast. One thing that I will say about participation for the industry that I would really like to see more of is I think as an industry, there's a huge opportunity to actually come together and take a lot of the wealth that's been generated that, to be fair, is still very unequally distributed within this own industry, actually. I mean, the Gini coefficient within crypto amongst the major tokens is quite bad, often worse than what we see in the global economy. There are a few studies that have tried to understand this and actually look at some of the companies and high net worth individuals that have made insane amounts of wealth as a result of the creation of this new asset class, and actually create a conversation around how do you, first of all, deploy some of that capital towards impact and philanthropic and socially good causes. All of what we're doing is inherently experimental, so we need people like that to actually offer up the funding to advance our causes. And then how can we use a community structure to actually come together as an industry and vote and say, we want to take, of the DeFi Impact Investment Fund, we want to take 30% towards climate, we want 30% towards privacy, we want 30% to go towards inclusion, and 10% towards health, voting rights, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity that we're missing here to actually rally a lot of the capital that's been created, and as a community decide what priorities are important to us to fund, and then do so, because it's totally possible.
I just want to add one thing on that, which is like, okay, I totally agree with Anna, and what does that look like in practice? And I think one piece of the puzzle that we haven't mentioned yet on this panel is quadratic funding and matching grants, and the opportunity for large actors, high net worth individuals, to sort of relinquish some of their decision-making power over to the broader populace through quadratic funding, like matching pools. And so shout out to Gitcoin here, who has really been pioneering this, and that is going through the process of sort of like open sourcing this utility so that every one of us can start to implement matching pools and this sort of like amazing engineering work that they've been doing. And so I think, like, again, to come back to that point of like, we need to translate the value moment, the value statement, into an engineered capacity, right? And so like the primitive that lines up with better distribution is quadratic funding, because it is this sort of one-to-one of like, okay, we're taking concentrated wealth and explicitly trying to deconcentrate it based on how other people are allocating smaller amounts of wealth. And so just an important note, I think, for us to give some, respect to the team over at Gitcoin, the work that they're doing, and just really excited to see quadratic funding become more of a part of what we do at Endaoment and what everybody here on this panel is sort of, incorporating into their product roadmaps.
DeFi is a massive social good, and I hope that's a key takeaway from this panel. We'll take one question from the audience just before we leave for any of the panelists. So we've got a question from the live stream here.
From the live stream? How's the chat? Shout out to the chat.
Oh man, it's a book. All right, so let's see what we got here. It says the challenge in the nonprofit industry is the financial infrastructure of local NGOs, say in Somalia, for example. That's the reason why international NGOs usually get the majority of donations, and hence a lot of funds are lost along the way in program support costs. How can DeFi builders onboard local NGOs who are the heroes of impact at the ground level?
Yeah, I could probably kick this off, and then there's probably some other answers here. First and foremost, find your favorite organizations on Endaoment and deploy them. Sorry for the shameless shill, but like that's a big piece of the puzzle. A lot of these larger organizations have dedicated development staff who think about how they can raise money day in and day out. And the difference is that the smaller NGOs don't have the time to be thinking about how they raise money day in and day out, and they just go where the money is. And so in a lot of ways, we need everybody in their local communities to go and help spread the the word about free, publicly available donation infrastructure that accepts any crypto asset. And so deploying organization contracts on Endaoment is like a really easy way for us to automatically get in touch with smaller nonprofits that don't have those development staffs that are thinking about this. Secondly, what I'll say is that we've built a feature specifically for this called Sponsored Projects that legally binds the large NGO to funnel the dollars to the sponsored project at a smaller program-based level. So, you know, if you have a specific program that you want to see funded from a large NGO that is really meant to drive down to a smaller NGO, make sure that you're giving them legally binding instructions that says that this money has to go to that project. And you can do that by opening a DAF and offering special instructions when you make a grant recommendation out of that DAF. And if the organization accepts that grant recommendation, they must verify with the original grant maker, being Endaoment or whoever is your DAF provider, that they actually use that money for that specific purpose. So spread the word, get your local nonprofits that don't have development staffs on board, and then use special instructions to create legally binding flows of capital into specific organizations.
Stepping back a little bit, I think there's also a ton of important lessons to be learned from more traditional activist communities, organizers, NGOs, and so forth. I mean, you know, when you think about DAOs, like obviously there's lots of features that are quite revolutionary, but there's also been, you know, collective communities that have been around for a long time, and I suspect there's a lot that can be learned from labor unions and co-ops and employee-owned businesses, and lots of other community organizations. And so I think, you know, to the point of whomever asked that question, you know, NGOs that are operating on the front lines of a lot of the challenges they're addressing are often the best position to really sort of inform the design process and the building of any tool that exists in technology writ large, but especially in DeFi as well. And I just think that truly, like any successful social movement has found a way to really, really incorporate the knowledge, the deep knowledge and understanding of people who have lived experience of the problem, or are led by the people themselves who have lived experience of that problem. And so would just encourage that to be a part of anybody's design process and work in this space.
I can't miss the opportunity to tell that NGO to open a GoodDollar wallet because, like Robbie, I mean, this is an example of the power of an organization being able to use the sources of capital directly that exist in the world, right? So this is an example of one of the use cases that we've seen around GoodDollar, is that we've seen community leaders who are in the field, quote unquote, open up wallets on behalf of their organizations, and they use that to crowdfund from all over the world directly into those foundations' wallets. So actually, if you go right now, there's a number of there's a community-run campaign called Crypto for Her, where I think there's around 25 different women leaders from Brazil, from Venezuela, from Ghana, South Africa, I'm not going to name all of the countries right now, who have organizations that are focused on empowering women and girls, and they are using GoodDollars to crowdfund globally, both from our community of members, but also hypothetically from large-scale donors, because this is the most direct way for them to get money directly to them, right? And so I think that's another example of how this is the paradigm shift creates multiple opportunities to solve the problem in an improved way.
Yeah, and I think to put a bow on all of that, the general theme here is disintermediation, right? The point of the question is that if you have large NGOs intermediating between the people on the ground actually doing the work and the people who want to provide funding to that work, that produces an opportunity for rent collection and high markups, so that most of the money isn't actually going to the people on the ground doing the work. And in the climate space, a lot of the same problems exist in the carbon markets, where middlemen and brokers absorb most of the value rather than the money actually getting to the people on the ground so they can do more of the great work. And I think public blockchains and DeFi are uniquely well suited to disintermediating these kinds of markets in a reliable and credible way because of the level of transparency and open access that they offer compared to private solutions, even if they happen to use DLT or blockchain under the hood.
Yeah, the DeFi developers create a system that is trusted, that is in the future, no more work is required. It's been developed and it perpetuates itself on the blockchain. So the need for these sort of rent collecting, no, don't worry, I'll take care of it, trust me, type people is minimized. That they're not, the waste isn't there anymore because the system handles that trust rather than various people sitting at desks. So yeah, we had a question from the second row. Yeah, sure.
All right. So I'm going to frame this in terms of carbon offsets, but it's a more general question. There's been talk of impact and trust, but what is what mechanisms have you seen that work well for verifiability and auditability? Because you have to be able to measure the impact to get that flowing in. And I'm sorry, the history on carbon offsets is not great. So how do you use Web3 to avoid sort of highly automated and optimized greenwashing, or kind of its equivalent in other ESG contexts? Because that's not been done well by those large central parties so far.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question was, with the example of carbon offsets having some bad history, with a Web3 or DeFi system, how do you guarantee verifiability and auditability, improve transparency, basically?
Yeah, and I do think that this general topic actually applies to a lot of the other issues, but thank you for framing it in a clear way. So I think there's really two separate issues that you're pointing out. On one hand, there's a supply side question of how do you ensure the integrity of the underlying offset activity, like the person planting the trees actually did it, the trees grew up to be strong and healthy and actually sequester carbon. That is definitely historically been a major source of concern around carbon offsets, and there's a lot of exciting opportunities to use blockchain to solve some of those problems. Digital MRV is sort of the buzzword associated with this approach, and the idea is that instead of relying on physical auditors going out and using their eyeballs to look at the site, you use things like drone imagery, satellite imagery, IoT measurement devices, a sort of constellation of data that is coming from verifiable sources where you can, maybe you're publishing this data onto IPFS and you have a hash of the data as it was written, and you can compare data from different sources to ensure that you're getting, that you're able to verifiably measure the impact. And you need a whole sort of new system for issuing credits using that data. And so the legacy registries like Vera and Gold Standard rely on a lot of manual processes. And I think there's an opportunity there to streamline and automate some of those processes using DMRV, data collection. On the demand side, which is more where the greenwashing question, how are these offsets being used, there's a very obvious opportunity around transparency to make it much harder to sort of credibly greenwash, if you know what I mean. Often the way that this greenwashing activity occurs is a corporation hires some consultants, they write up a giant 45-page PDF document sort of describing their net zero strategy, and then buried somewhere in that PDF document is the specific projects that they supported for their offsetting needs. And let's just say that most people don't go searching through a 45-page PDF document to check what the people at this corporation actually used to offset their emissions. So when you're consuming these credits publicly on a blockchain where your transactions are out there for everyone to see, it's a lot harder to sort of hide your activity in a 45-page PDF document, which opens a vector for people to exert social pressure on these organizations. We can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good on the climate issue, and so I think it would be unwise to say no, don't do net zero, don't take the steps you're taking. What we really want is greater accountability, and transparency helps a lot to give that level of accountability.